My name is Gloria Mwaniga, and I'm a writer. So I grew up with a father who had a huge library, and so I remember even as a child I had access to lots and lots of books. And because both my parents were language teachers, we had a lot of Kiswahili books. So most of my early readings were actually Swahili novels. So I read a lot of books. And then the other thing is that my dad used to write as well. So I remember in the evenings after work, I would see him seated at his table, just writing and journaling. So that taught me from very early on that, thinking and journaling and putting down your thoughts is a very normal thing. So just growing around that environment must have helped. But thirdly, I must say that there are also stories that he told me about his university days. He was a student at the University of Nairobi in the late 1970s. And so whenever he'd find me, for example, reading a book by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he'd go like, oh, by the way, when Ngugi, so he had all these stories that he liked to tell me. He'd tell me, by the way, when I was a student, we went to Karimithu to watch Ngugi's play, I Will Marry When I Want. And he would tell me about how it was, the atmosphere then. So that means that as a child, the whole world of books and even writers was very, very real to me. So that must have contributed. Then later as an adult, when I joined university, I was also at the University of Nairobi. I remember joining a readers club. Yeah, there's a group of writers who used to meet, like a monthly writing workshop. So I used to go there and just give them my work to sort of read and workshop and also help workshop other people's work. So I believe that helped me take writing very seriously from a very, very young age. I started off as what I would call a literary writer. But the more I sort of engage with our oral histories and oral literature and mythology, African mythology, the more I find myself sort of gravitating towards fantasy. So right now I might be writing a lot of historical fiction and sort of literary fiction, but who knows, I'll probably just shift to something else. So I don't want to pigeonhole myself. Writing is both my career and my side hustle, and this is what I mean. It is my career because I left my job. I used to work as a high school teacher for about 8 years, but I quit to write full-time. So these days I wake up and, I sit on my desk and I try to write. I dedicate time. I try to sort of network with other writers in different places. I read books on craft and just try to dedicate my whole life to this thing. So in that way, I would say, yes, writing is my career. But writing is also my side hustle, because I try to divide my year into two. So during the first half of the year, I write my own work. But in the second half of the year, I work as a consultant. I do technical business writing for corporates. I also edit and I ghost write. So you see, writing is, I'm still writing though, that is. The side hustle is also still writing. So yeah, and apparently it looks like the side hustle pays me more than the real job. So at this point, I'm just trying to figure out which is the side hustle and which is the real career. But yeah, that's it. It depends with what kind of writing you're talking about. Yeah, because if it's like literary writing, then I would think not. Because first of all, you might write a story. It takes time to create work. So you take like 6 months writing a story, then you send it out to 10 journals, you get 10 rejections, and that takes time. So sometimes you wait for 8 months to a year to hear back from a literary journal. So you see, if you're depending on this thing for rent, and it takes like 8 months, and then you get a rejection, and you have to sort of think about where else to send it. Yeah, so it has no guarantees, and in that way, I think writing that doesn't pay per se. But then there are alternatives. You could I write textbooks for schools. I left the classroom, but I went back as a writer of textbooks. So I write textbooks with local publishers like Oxford Press, and that sort of writing, once the book is being used in schools, then you make money. I also write children's books with Moran Publishers, and I write for newspapers. I used to write for a long time. I wrote for The Nation, some articles here and there. So that sort of writing pays, and like I've mentioned, corporate writing also really pays. That actually pays well when you do sort of like technical writing and consultancies for corporates. That pays. But literary writing, once in a while. What you're saying is very important because I have an agent. My agent is in America. And one thing she always writes to me to say is that writing is the slowest. This is the slowest industry in the world. The whole publishing industry is the slowest industry in the world. So what you're saying about having something else is very, very important. And one of the things that I like to encourage the younger writers that I meet and talk to is for them to develop really specific skills in other things. Just expand yourself, like editing. If you're in editing, if you proofread, if you copy edit, those kind of things, they're still in the writing world. So you'll still pick up one or two things that can help you enrich your own work. But it just makes sense to either get a day job or to at least have skills that are marketable out there. Just find something else that you can do. Well, I find my ideas anywhere. Sometimes I'm reading a writer I like, or I'm reading just a sort of a newspaper article, and then I see something and it sort of strikes me. So I quickly get out my phone and sort of go to the notes and save that idea. There was once I was standing outside, I was in town, and then it started raining. So I'd sheltered, I went to sort of shelter under a building, and suddenly I started thinking, what if I write a story about a woman who's inside the shop and the other one is outside and it's raining, and they're sort of stuck in this space. And they're probably enemies, but they can't get out of each other's face. What happens in that case? So yes, sometimes I'm walking in the market, when I like going shopping because I'm very fascinated by the stories of market women and just how they run their lives and their children and everything. So I'm always just getting my stories anywhere and everywhere, newspapers, on the radio, on TV. I can watch a program and see something. Yes, so what happens after that, I go and then I sort of just write down the idea. And I like to work with an outline. So I'll come up with an outline and I'm like, okay, so this happened, and then what happened, what follows. So usually it's what next. So I come up with a skeleton and then I try to flesh it out over time. But I read a lot. One of the things about my process is that I read a lot of other writers. Like if I'm writing one short story, I'll find myself reading about 30 or 40 other short stories. Like I can't write without reading. Maybe, but I don't know why exactly I read, but I suspect is that I'm always looking for how people or how other writers expand their worlds, how they see their worlds. And then I just sort of try to imagine if I was writing this, how differently would I have done it? So I have a first draft. I put it aside for a couple of weeks as I work on other things. Then I go back to it, try to read through it. And as I'm reading this time, I'm trying to, to edit it and to sort of just improve it. So once I've done like 3 drafts, then I send it to a friend of mine. I have a couple of friends who are writers, but also just editors. So I send it to probably a writer friend of mine and an editor friend of mine. And then I take their edits and suggestions and rework the story, a couple of times. And so I revise obsessively. So I'm sort of like a perfectionist in that way. So I revise and revise. By the time I'm sending it out, I am really happy with it. Boyi, I wrote Boyi because a friend of mine, I told you I used to work as a teacher. So one of my colleagues was I was talking to her one day. I saw a newspaper article, that was in 2016. I saw a newspaper article about the possibility of the Sabbath Land Defense Force regrouping. Then I think I took this newspaper article to my friend and asked her, hey, have you seen this newspaper article? What do you think of this sort of war? And then, so instead of answering, she looked at me and told me, by the way, Gloria, do you know I was actually in Mount Elgon when this was happening? I witnessed this war and it actually affected my family. In fact, all my certificates and personal belongings were burnt in that house. I remember being horrified and I just told her, okay, let's not talk about this now. We can let's find time and just have a conversation later. So later I invited her to my house and then she told me about how her family lost everything and just also the emotional sort of trauma of this war. And I remember for weeks after that, I could not sit still. I started Googling, trying to find out information about the war. I sort of looked for clips, TV, radio, TV clips or YouTube clips about the war. And so I realized that the story was being told in a very different way. I don't know whether to say it was being whitewashed or just, it lacked nuance. It lacked a lot of the nuances that I had gotten by speaking to my friend. So I decided, okay, fine, I'm going to do this. I'm going to challenge myself to tell this story properly. And I'll do it by writing a sort of a fictional story from the point of view of a little girl who was in that place at the time it was happening and who witnessed this war. That is what motivated me to write Boyi.